Hello, everybody. Welcome and thanks for joining us today. With me, I've got Steve Legal from WEC Energy Group. I'm Drew Ganther from OneLayer. We're going to have a conversation today about how cellular connectivity is becoming more and more imperative to supporting grid operations. So before I dive in too deep on getting a conversation kicked off, I think we'll pass the mic here to Steve to set the stage and where WEC is in their journey and sort of frame up some of the conversation here.
So I'm Steve Legal. I'm the Director of Infrastructure and Operations at WEC Energy Group. We are a family of 7 regulated gas and electric utilities, primarily distribution based on both the gas and electric side. And what does that really mean? That means that we have a lot of territory to cover with our network and our telecom infrastructure. So we really have to leverage a lot of different capabilities that are out there, whether it be cellular, some private wireless solutions, some lease line solutions. All those things tend to come together. And as we look at our next generation and how we stay ahead of the needs of the utility, cellular is just another form of that, because again, it's out there in such a broad range. And even looking at some of the private cellular options is starting to take shape for our company.
So that's a really, I think, key topic that a lot of utilities are struggling with what direction to go, right? And everybody is seeing the explosion of devices and the number of devices they need to support connectivity to modernize the grid. But the question of how do I support that connectivity, what's the right path, is an interesting one. So maybe if you can share, where is WEC Energy Group today? And from a cellular standpoint specifically, what path have you chosen to go down and what drove you down that path for current state?
Sure. So for current state, we've had to leverage the public cell carriers out there. We work with many of them. In fact, we work with all of them for the most part, because coverage characteristics are different, device types are different, security is different, our business needs are different. But while working with all of them creates opportunity, it also creates challenges, right? And when we look at the challenges that creates, observability of the devices, how do we control what devices are on the network? What does the business unit need? And then again, really being able to manage those devices on a day-to-day perspective. We have limited staff, right? Nobody has an endless staff to watch this stuff and take care of it. And again, with the importance of providing connectivity to all aspects of the gas and electric distribution systems, it becomes extremely critical.
Yeah, it's interesting is there's obvious advantages to taking that path, and quick time to value, just set right up on existing infrastructure. The RAN sites are out there, the coverage is there, and you can just tune in, right? And you can capture that value of getting things connected quicker. You mentioned a lot of the challenges that go along with that. Maybe you can share with us sort of a real world example of how does that come to life? Like what happens when there's a storm or some kind of connectivity outage, some kind of, regardless of how that might happen, whether it's a storm, whether it's a cyber attack. I think you guys at WEC have experienced all of the above. So maybe you could share with us, what does that look like when these type of events happen?
Sure. I'll pick on an event that took place. I won't talk about the specific event, but I'll talk about capacity constraints. So with a lot of our distribution assets relying on cellular connectivity, when there's events that take place, well, again, whether it be a storm that causes the cellular networks to become congested, or a planned sporting event, or any other type of event, music festival, it places strain on our ability to be able to see our assets. Again, the gas system requires a lot of viewing and protecting of what's out there with our distribution valves and pressure gauges and all those things. The same thing holds true on our electric side, right? Where we can't get private infrastructure in place, we need this public infrastructure to be there and available. And again, as part of being available is how do we manage that availability? Do we wait for somebody to call and say that something went down, or do we put the tools and processes in place to be able to actually understand what devices are out there, how are they behaving, what's their connection state look like, and then when things do go wrong, what do we have in place to help us nail down what the problem is? Is it us or is it them?
So maybe can you talk a little bit about before adopting tools to give you that appropriate level of visibility into the devices, whether it's the devices behind the routers or just the context of the actual device behind the SIM, what did the process look like prior to gaining that visibility, and after gaining that visibility, where do you see the biggest potential impact and gains for WEC?
Yeah, so prior to getting, and I'll just call it a single pane of glass, right? Just for our conversation, prior to getting the visibility in there with a specific tool, we had to rely on the business telling us their devices weren't communicating anymore, or maybe we were notified by the wireless carrier that they were having a system issue, or we lost visibility with our routers or other devices out in the field, but it didn't necessarily point to what the problem was. So it could have been us, again, it could have been them. So a whole lot of moving parts out there and a whole lot of people ultimately trying to chase down a problem where in our new world, we're able to bring up the pane of glass and kind of see where the breakdown is, and then notify the right people to address the problem in a much quicker fashion than what we've been able to do.
Do you feel like that ultimately trickles down to your ratepayers in terms of what they experience with their ability to be supported or rely on WC Energy to deliver effectively? Do you feel that they feel that at all, or is it primarily felt within the IT operations group that's supporting the connectivity?
Well, I think directly it's felt by like my team and probably the operations teams that are out in the field responding. But in the end, if we don't have to roll a truck because we've identified the problem, absolutely the ratepayers benefit from that. And if we talk about being able to reduce outages, the overall outage time frame or outages in general, by having additional visibility into the infrastructure that supports our distribution systems, they're definitely going to see a positive side of that.
Cool. Yeah, it's interesting. I think that's a common thing that I talk to a lot of utilities that have a hard time pinpointing exactly how it will impact the ratepayer. I think some do it really, really well, and others struggle with that narrative to the UC or to whoever they're looking to gain further support from. So I think that that's probably valuable to our audience to hear that from your perspective. So we've talked a little bit about the operational impacts of having increased visibility in a single pane of glass and all these devices in field. Let's talk a little bit about the cybersecurity impacts and the control requirements here. I think there's a common, there's a common path to get private APNs through the carriers. And so I'm curious into how you made that decision of why that was the right path at the time, what you felt you gained from that from a security and control perspective, and then what you've learned over years of using those of the reality of what you get.
Yeah. Yeah, so we have leveraged the private APN aspect from the wireless carriers primarily to one, extend our network a little bit, right, into their world to provide a quote unquote secure connection to them that we could still control the number of devices, the IP address that the devices were communicating on. Because again, we're talking about firewall access of devices in and out. So if we can control that aspect, it gives us somewhat of an advantage, right? But it still doesn't solve all the issues. In the end, we still are relying on cellular carriers to do their part in this entire ecosystem, right? And manage our security, which again, I believe we do a good job of that in working with them, and they do a good job, again, reciprocating that back to us. But this is one other reason why, not just us looking into it, but other utilities are looking into private infrastructure. So we can own everything, right from cradle to grave. We can manage the security functionality around all of that and really eliminate some of the, I'll call it a hurdle, right? Because for me to have to manage an APN with a carrier is somewhat of a hurdle for me. I have to stand up all the infrastructure and manage all the pieces and parts. If I can bring that technology in-house and mimic what they're doing here internally, I flatten the network a little bit better for myself. And then I ultimately can own things a lot easier than what I can in today's world.
So that's, I think that's what a lot of utilities are feeling, but I also will give out the reality that not all utilities are going to be able to afford to go with their own private network, right? And so I think that you guys have a lot of interesting lessons learned that I found really powerful when I started working with you and your team at WEC. The whole concept that the APN is inherently secure and private, sure, to a certain extent, but there's a lot of risk that sort of accumulates over time. And what I thought was interesting is you and your team's awareness of the risk was higher than most that I speak to. So when you guys sort of shared with us on the process of getting SIM cards from your vendors and how those ultimately get out into the field, into the devices, and this sort of lack of validation that it went where you thought it went, and you explained quite a bit. Your team was quite educated on the reality of the operational breakdowns and how those introduce risk over time. So maybe you could speak to that a little bit, because I think that you and your team's awareness of how that plays out in field was really sharp.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest issue that we face is timeliness, right? So we get SIM cards in bulk from the carriers that we can then light up on our APN and deploy into field devices that bring connectivity to the distribution systems. And the reason why we get them in bulk is because it's not as easy as calling me up and say, hey, we're going to light these 5 devices up this week. We don't own the network. We don't own the SIM cards. So we have to get things in bulk. And managing things through spreadsheets and other mechanisms today between gas, electric, and my team creates a challenge. The good thing is we do have some validation steps in place to ensure that we have a good handle on where things are. It just isn't as efficient as it could be. Again, that goes back to the private infrastructure. We look at private infrastructure as the possibility of becoming more efficient. And while we talk about affordability, as we work through our business case and set our strategy on next gen wireless, all of that comes into play because the time spent from people of organizing and managing, that all plays a huge part. And in the end, it's all about customer satisfaction. If we can shorten the time of delivering services to the field and providing, I'm going to say more reliable services to the field because now I own it. In the end, it's going to be more cost effective and efficient in the long run. But as long as we're using cellular devices in the field that we don't necessarily own the SIM cards, there's going to always be a gap of ease of management of those devices and where they are and who owns them.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. And I think something that's not regularly talked about enough in our common industry forums about this whole progress of going private, staying on public carriers, where's the middle ground, right? And I think the reality is even for the largest IOUs that have gone first and gone private in a big way, for the most part, there's still a lot of middle ground of leveraging public carrier APNs, and how does all that come into the picture to have a unified way of managing all of this, right? Giving my full landscape, talking about it from not what architecture am I on, but what am I supporting? What are the use cases I'm supporting? And do I have a full scope and understanding of that? And is it easy to digest, right? And so I think that it's interesting to hear from you. What have you started to do differently that improves your ability to better operationalize some of these different use cases around segmentation, around control of the devices on APNs? And how will you carry that forward even as you go into a private strategy of adding private to the broader strategy? I think you made the statement pretty clear that it'll be many, many years where you're definitely still leveraging the public carrier APNs. And so how do you increase your ability to see and control the risks that had historically been accumulating in that part of the domain?
Yeah. So the first thing we've done is we've limited the number of carriers that we're going to proceed with going forward, right? So we limit our footprint, but without giving up some reliability, right? Because we want to have some reliability out there to ensure that if one carriers have a problem, we can at least keep our devices up and connected. We've also brought in tool sets, right? We leverage OneLayer to help us see the visibility of what's going on out there, which makes my team more efficient in managing and planning and gives us another communication piece in talking with the business on, hey, this is what we're seeing. Like, we need to do firmware upgrades. We need to do this. We need to do that. All those things that, again, would require 15 steps before, now we narrow those down to 1 or 2 steps before we can actually act. The beautiful thing about it all is everything that we're focused on today, we believe, and we don't know for sure, but we believe that everything is going to be transferable into the private world. So none of the work that we're doing today is throwaway. We're preparing ourselves for what is to come. And again, we know that we have to continuously evolve and be thinking about what's next if we're going to continue to support the business and the desires that they're going to have 5, 10, 15 years from now.
So I love all of those guidelines. That I think you're right, that anything you do in the private carrier APN domain, it is very much transferable to the private. And I think that a lot of people, when they go private, the sheer magnitude of change in that project and the complexity can really throttle progress for a lot of teams. And so I think it's really interesting that you guys have taken a path that's a little bit unique in the way that you've started building process and you started building the programmatic approach to modern cellular. I think you call it next gen cellular, right? And I think you guys have done a great job of thinking through the processes around it and implementing those today. So, maybe you can help the audience understand, how did you start to identify the pain points that you wanted to then address? When you and I first met, you were in a unique group of individuals, I think, that very quickly saw the light and saw what this would do for you and how it aligned to your identified challenges. So how did you get to that point? What do you guys do internally to better document, understand what the gaps are that you're trying to fill so that you know when something addresses them to act?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is we're always looking at inventory management of our devices, right? Not necessarily from a connectivity standpoint, but from a billing perspective. So as we're trying to manage what devices we're paying for, we work to understand, one, are they in use? What type of use? What's the device? What's the business case? And that really started driving a lot of what we were focused on. But then the more time I spend with other utilities that are on this same next gen wireless journey that we're trying to develop right now, I've learned a lot from them. And they've helped us save a lot of time in setting up processes and thinking about things that maybe we wouldn't have thought about if we were just taking one step at a time. So right now we're working on the big picture. The big picture is formulated by, and I have many years in the wireless world too. So being able to bring some of that experience forward and then looking at how our industry operates and in other utilities that we interact with and how they've managed that as well, and leveraging each and every one of those pieces as we continue to work on our step forward, knowing that it's probably going to be one step forward and two steps back, but eventually we're going to get where we're going.
Yeah, I think that's a great message. I think that's where most of the industry is right now. And I see WEC Energy Group as such a forward-leaning, forward-thinking organization to take action, where a lot of similar-sized organizations that have similar dynamics to you guys are a little slower to act. And I think that a lot of that is just uncertainty of strategy and uncertainty of the options in front of them. So I think these type of conversations, to your point, talking to your peers, talking about figuring out what they've learned so far, are really valuable. So we hugely appreciate your time and willingness to share. If there was, any few key pointers you would give your peers beyond that on really tactical things that you've learned that they could implement in the short term, that'll help them just move forward and start making more progress than maybe they feel like they're making today, what are those key insights that you'd provide or pointers you provide?
Yeah, a couple things. One is I would not rely on the carriers providing you the information that you need, because their information may not meet all of your needs. And then two, the hardware vendors that we use with some of our connectivity, we use so many different ones. There's not one solution that they provide that can bring everything together into that single pane of glass to help us better serve the business, or best serve the business, I should say, because we always want to be best at what we do when it talks about the business relationship and the business connectivity. Again, they rely on us for so many different things. Yeah. And so again, aside from what I shared, I think the most important thing is, regardless of the price tag on any one solution, form a strategy, focus on what the business needs are going to be today, tomorrow, and in the future, and allow the business case and the business needs to drive the direction you go in. Because as we look at more and more business use cases, whether it be meters or distribution, you'll be surprised at the amount of money invested in those independent systems today. It may just pay for the solution that you need down the road.
That's a really interesting point. I think that too commonly, a lot of the conversations that I get into in the different industry forums are talking about the cellular technology itself and forgetting the why we do it, and really aligning to what are these use cases we're supporting? Why is this why is there a better way? What's the outcome? How does the outcome change if we have next gen cellular, whatever that might mean to any given utility? I think is really important to think through, what are we really trying to achieve from a grid modernization or power delivery, a gas delivery, water delivery, whatever it might be. what are we really doing here? Why are we doing
Right.
this? And I think that's really, really insightful. Um, I think to sort of wrap this up, we've had a few different key points that kind of stretch into both realms of this private APN world on carrier networks, as well as should we move private and what's the element of the private strategy. I think that to summarize a lot of what we've talked about, there's not one answer, and everybody's domain is going to be, or everybody's territory is going to be a little bit different. That's going to drive different dynamics to the right answer for that utility. But I think that the common thread that I'm hearing in this conversation, and also in conversations across the United States and even beyond that, is APNs are going to be a piece of the strategy for a long time. Nobody's getting off of APNs anytime soon. And I think rather than just condemning the carriers or thinking like the carriers don't give me what I need, to understand their business model and understand what you can and can't get from them. It doesn't necessarily mean that if it doesn't come from the carrier, that you can't take more awareness, more visibility, more control, reduce risk and improve your ability to operate. There is a lot of ways to go about doing that. If you think outside the box, talk to peers, and yes, it probably means adding some solutions along the way to simplify the operations. But I think that it's really important to broaden the conversation around next-gen wireless to look at both sides of the equation rather than just focusing on private and what are we doing there. How do we also increase our ability to execute effectively, even with APNs in the equation, because they will be for a very long time.
Yeah, I mean, no matter what you decide, right? The deployment of any wireless network, especially across the 4-state region that we are, is going to take a lot of time. So finding a strategic mesh of public and private together is going to be extremely important. And again, I'll go back to what I had said earlier. Finding the common ground between the two to make sure that you're not duplicating efforts or doing it one way in one environment and a different way in a different environment, and then causing confusion when issues do arise, because issues are going to come up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that if we spend all of our energy with our key engineering leaders and our, strategic IT leaders talking about whether or not it's private or not private, I think we're going to miss some of the context that really what we should be thinking about is technology moves fast. It's not just the cellular connectivity. It's what else is out there that allows me to give faster issue, resolution, faster, reduced operational and cyber risk, right? And just overall confidence in whatever strategy I choose, whatever architecture I deploy. Do I have confidence in the ability to audit that connectivity and know at any given time where are we, especially when we're under pressure, right? So I think it's important to really stamp that APNs are not the problem in a whole, right? Like I think a lot of organizations are going to continue using those and maybe only public carrier networks and APNs, but that doesn't mean that we're stuck with old operations of how to make that work for the utility. I think there's a lot of things that you've outlined here today, Steve, that can make real meaningful gains for the way the utilities are able to leverage those public carrier networks over the private APNs and still modernize their approach without having to go big bang and move over to a private cellular infrastructure.
Right.
Thank you so much for the time today. Is there anything else that you want to leave the audience with?
No, well, other than just my appreciation, thanks for the opportunity to come talk today. This is a very interesting topic to me. Again, having spent 17 years in the wireless industry, it's awesome to see it coming full circle in the utility industry and seeing the utilities dabble in this space and take control of their environments. So again, very exciting times for me. So thank you again.
Great. Well, we've got another conversation, a similar topic, and we'll have a little bit of evolved understanding as your strategy progresses at the UTC National Conference. So if this really hits on some of the challenges that the audience is thinking about and chewing on and trying to get peer guidance, then I'm sure that you'd be open to talk to your peers at the UTC National Conference. We'll be there on stage, but we'll be there all week, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, looking forward to it.
Same. All right. Well, thank you again, Steve. Really appreciate your time here, and thanks for everybody for joining. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me at drew.ganther@onelayer.com, or ping me on LinkedIn, and happy to field whatever questions the audience may have.